Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce my friend, my colleague, and I think, the guru of National College Health Assessment, Dr. Larry Hembroff.
Good morning. I'm going to share my screen and we can start the slides. Thank you, Dennis, for that generous introduction, and see what we can do with the time that we have here. So good morning. Thank you for joining us to look at the results of the 2020 National College Health Assessment Survey at Michigan State University. At Michigan State, we used the results of the NCHA survey to get a snapshot of how the student population at the university is doing, what the trends in student health are, and what the impact of policy changes or program efforts have been. In this presentation, we'll see examples of all these uses. First, a little background about the NCHA. As Dennis has already mentioned, the National College Health Assessment was developed by the American College Health Association with the assistance of the Core Institute, and it was created back in around the year 2000. Since then, it's been administered on more than 500 college campuses nationwide, and roughly 150 of those participate in any given year. The topics covered in the questionnaire that's used for the survey include the impediments to academic performance, sexual health, alcohol, tobacco, and other drug use, weight, nutrition, and exercise, mental health, and personal safety and violence. The questionnaire was originally designed as a paper and pencil instrument as a part of a mailed survey, but it got converted to a web-based survey around the year 2000, and it's been used largely as a web-based survey ever since that. The web survey version began in 2003. The major questionnaire has been revised in a substantial way on two different occasions. The original questionnaire is referred to as NCHA 1. It was revised in 2009, and that new version then has been referred to as NCHA 2. And the questionnaire was revised again in 2019, and the new version at that point was referred to as NCHA 3. At MSU, the first time it was conducted was in the year 2000. MSU was one of the original universities that adopted and made use of the NCHA survey. I think at the time there were only 28 universities in the country that were administering it. But we've conducted the survey every 2 years since then. It's always been administered to random samples of currently enrolled students. Both undergrads and grad and professional students are included in the samples, but the sample sizes have varied over the years. The smallest sample size we had was 773. The largest was 1,700. It's been consistently administered at the same time of year in order to negate any seasonal variation in students' behavior or health. And it's always been from mid-February to the first part of March. Although the questionnaire is administered by the American College Health Association, all of the sampling and management of the sample, communication with the respondents and stuff is handled by the Office for Survey Research here on campus. Now, because of the major revision to the questionnaire in 2019, we conducted two NCHA surveys in 2020, one using the NCHA 2 questionnaire and the other using the new NCHA 3 questionnaire. We did this primarily because the changes being made in NCHA 3 were extensive, both in terms of the old questions dropped and new questions added, and in the question wording and response options offered for quite a few of the old questions that remained in the questionnaire. Consequently, we weren't certain how well responses to questions in the new questionnaire would compare to responses we'd seen in the old version and for which we had much longitudinal data. Based on our communications with staff at the American College Health Association, we believe that MSU was the only university in the country to conduct a survey using NCHA 2 in 2020, and the only university to conduct surveys using both NCHA 2 and NCHA 3 in the same year. The survey that we used the NCHA 2 questionnaire for had 846 respondents. The survey with using NCHA 3 had 1,457 respondents. Both were started on February 12th and continued until March 1st when both ended. The data files for each were weighted to match the demographic profiles of the enrolled students during spring semester of 2020 with respect to graduate or undergraduate status academic class, gender, and race ethnicity. The response rate for NCHA 2 was 17%, for NCHA 3 was 21%. The overall margin of sampling error for NCHA 2 was plus or minus 3.4%, and the margin of sampling error for NCHA 3 was plus or minus 2.6%. After a careful review of the results from both surveys, we concluded that many of the revisions in NCHA 3 do not lend themselves to compare with results from earlier surveys. Consequently, we will be focused today almost entirely on the 2020 results of the survey using the NCHA 2 questionnaire. Now, an important side note here is that all of the data collected for both surveys ended roughly 10 days before COVID started. And as COVID started, it changed the life at MSU and almost everywhere else in the country. So all of the results here reflect what was going on prior to the effect of COVID on our population. First, we're going to look briefly at the profile of the respondents to the survey. This bar chart shows the breakdown of the student body with respect to demographic characteristics. As you can see, 50.3% of students are female, 67.4% are white domestic students, 11.1% are international students, 36% are older than 21 years of age. Graduate and professional students make up 20.9% of the student body, and 94.7% are full-time students. The percentage breakdowns for sex, race, ethnicity, and class match the enrollment figures at MSU for spring 2020 exactly. In the sample of respondents, 37% reported living on campus, 8% said they were members of a Greek fraternity or sorority, 61% said they were employed weekly, 34% reported being volunteering weekly, and 16% reported being gay, lesbian, bisexual, or unsure of their sexual orientation. And 75% reported none of the disabilities or chronic conditions that are listed here on the chart. And that means that roughly 25% of respondents reported having at least one of the types of disabilities listed. Having a psychiatric condition was the most common type of disability, and ADHD was the second most common type of disability. The order of these two is the reverse of their order in the findings from 2018. But in both years, chronic illness was the third most common type of disability. The percentage of students who reported having at least one of these types of disabilities has generally increased over the past decade as MSU tries to make itself more inclusive. Now, the first question in the survey asked respondents to rate their health overall. Respondents were asked if they would say their health was excellent, very good, good, fair, or poor. Now, throughout the slides, I generally show the more desirable or healthy responses in green, darker green being better, and the less desirable or unhealthy responses in shades of red, darker red being worse. And that is true here. Roughly half the students rated their health as excellent or very good, while roughly 1 in 7 rated their health as only fair or poor. Now, the results for 2020 are very similar to, but not quite as good as those of 2018. The green line in this graph shows the combined percentage of students who rated their health as excellent or very good in each of the surveys since 2000. The red line shows the combined percentage of students who rated their health as fair or poor over the same time period. Notice that the results are very similar year to year from 2002 to 2014, but then the percentages rating their health as excellent or very good decreased, while the percentages rating their health as fair or poor increased. This is a matter of concern, particularly since ill health can adversely affect how well students do academically, and that is the primary mission of the university. So why has there been a decrease in health ratings? Something else has to have changed in order to produce this change. And we've already seen that there was an increase in the percentage of students on campus who have some disability or chronic health condition. Individuals with such conditions are more likely to rate their health as fair or poor than are individuals without such conditions, and less likely to rate their health as excellent or very good. Now, this change in the composition of the student body explains some of the change in perceived health, but not all of it. As we go through the other survey results, we'll try to identify other changes that are contributing to the decline in perceived health among students. So the things that increased in terms of composition were the percentages of students who have chronic health problems or conditions. But maybe the more recent years were simply days when other health problems were also rampant, maybe like an outbreak of flu or lots and lots of sprained ankles in one year than another that changed how people perceive their health. Let's see if there was a change in the bouts of illness or physical health problems that aren't chronic that students experienced. Respondents were asked if they had been diagnosed or treated for 25 different physical health problems in the past 12 months. This chart shows the percentages of respondents who said they were diagnosed or treated for each in the past year. The chart shows 4 bars for each illness. The red bar for the 2020 results, the orange bar for the 2018 results, light red for 2016, and off-white for 2012. If the bars are roughly the same length for each disease, it means that there was little change from one year to the next. The chart shows there is very little difference in the percentages of students having any of the problems compared to earlier years. At the bottom of the chart, we show the percentages of students who reported having at least one of the 25 health problems during the year. It indicates that 52.3% of respondents reported having one or more of the health problems in 2020, which is very similar to the percentages in each of the other years prior to that. Since there has been no real change in the prevalence of these episodic physical health problems, this can't explain the drop in the perceived health status. There are a number of other sources of health that can, other than physical, that can also significantly impact individuals. Some of these are emotional or social or relational. So let's look at results regarding some of these. Respondents were presented with a list of 31 common behavioral, relationship, or health issues and asked whether or not the respondent had a problem with each in the past year, and if so, whether the problem adversely affected their academic performance. In this bar chart, the length of each bar represents the total percentage of students who reported experiencing a problem with each particular issue. The dark red portion of each bar represents the percentage of all students who said their academic performance suffered because of the problem. Now you can see the percentages that reported experiencing each of the 31 types of problems and how many said it hurt their academic work. We've sorted the problems in decreasing order of occurrence. The chart indicates at the top that 67% of students reported having a problem with stress, and the 31.9% reported stress problems hurt their academic performance. Near the bottom, the chart indicates that 1.6% of students reported they or their partner experienced a pregnancy, and that 0.8% reported it negatively impacted their academic performance. Notice that the darker red segment of the bars is a larger portion of some bars than others. That is, sometimes lots of students experience a problem, but it isn't as likely to hurt their academic performance as some other problem would, for example, extracurricular activities compared to depression. While very similar percentages of students reported having these problems, a much larger portion of those who had a problem with depression said it hurt their academic work than was the case for those having a problem with extracurricular activities. Of the 31 issues with which students reported having problems during the year, these are the top 10 that students said hurt their academics. The chart indicates stress was the most often mentioned problem that hurt their academic performance, and was mentioned by 32% of students, followed by anxiety, sleep difficulties, and depression. The 7th most often mentioned was concern for a troubled friend or family member, and the 10th is relationship difficulty. These 6 are all socio-emotional problems rather than physical. The problems on this list and their order looks very much the same as it did in 2018, 2016, and 2014. However, the percentages of students who said stress or depression hurt their performance has increased. At the same time, the percentage of students who said their internet use or electronic gaming activities hurt their performance has decreased. Notice that alcohol is not on this list. While more than a third of respondents said they experienced a problem with alcohol, few of them, only 4%, said it hurt their academic performance. Questionnaire includes additional questions that allow us to explore stress and emotional health further. The questionnaire asked respondents to rate how much stress they were feeling over the past 12 months. Stress could be from any source or combination of sources. The pie chart indicates that 11% of respondents said they experienced tremendous stress over the year, and another 45% said they experienced more than average stress. Only 2% reported no stress. The second chart unfolds that pie chart for 2020 into a stacked bar on the right, so it can be compared to the results of each of the previous 5 surveys. You can see that the pink and the red portions of the bar increase from 2010 through 2020. This will be a little easier to see if we sum the percentage reporting more than average stress and tremendous stress for each year, and then plot the sums as a line graph in the next chart. As the chart shows, there's been a clear gradual increase in the percentage of students reported experiencing a lot of stress. It has gone up from the 48% of students in 2010 to 56% of students in 2020. Those who rated their stress as more than average or tremendous were significantly more likely to rate their overall health as fair or poor, and less likely to rate it as excellent or very good compared to those who rated their stress as average, less than average, or no stress. So a substantial part of the decline in students' reported health is the increase in stress they report experiencing. Now remember that all of this data was collected, and this increase that we're seeing was prior to whatever the effects of COVID was, because the data were collected prior to COVID. To get at what the various sources of stress might be, another section of the questionnaire asked respondents which of 12 different issues they found very difficult or traumatic over the past year. The bar chart shows the percentage of respondents who claimed each issue was traumatic or very difficult. By far, the issue that was most often mentioned as causing them trauma or was very difficult was academics. It was number 1. The second most often mentioned was personal appearance. The third most often was finances. Career-related issues was number 4, and sleep difficulties was number 5. Now, the greater the number of these issues that students found traumatic or very difficult, the more stress they reported feeling. When students reported experiencing 4 or more of these, 2/3 or more rated their stress as more than average or tremendous. 37% of students reported 4 or more of these very traumatic or very difficult in 2020, up slightly from 2018. So to understand this increase, it might be helpful to know if all of the issues were experienced as all of them increased or only some of them increased from prior years. In this chart, we display the percent experiencing each of these issues as very difficult or traumatic for 2020 and compared to 2018, 2016, 14, 2012, and 2010. The result for 2020 is the dark bar at the top of each set. The result for 2010 is the white bar at the bottom of each set. And as you can see, the percentage saying some issues were traumatic or very difficult didn't change much from prior years. The ones that did increase in 2020 compared to prior years were other social relationships, personal appearance, personal health issues, and sleep difficulties, not academics or career-related issues. To explore emotional well-being further, the questionnaire asked respondents how recently they felt each of 8 different types of problematic emotions. It also asked how recently they took or considered 3 different types of self-harm actions usually associated with poor emotional health. The 8 different emotions are at the top of the list on the left, and the 3 different types of self-harm related behaviors are at the bottom of the list. The overall length of each bar is the percentage of respondents who felt this way at least some of the time in the past year. The darker colors represent more recent time periods. The chart indicates that a great many of students have episodes throughout the year of very intense emotional struggles, but thankfully it also indicates that relatively few engage in self-destructive, harmful thoughts or actions. For example, while more than 80% report feeling overwhelmed and over 50% report feeling things were hopeless, less than 10% said they had considered suicide. Now, 10% considering suicide is still a pretty major issue of concern to us. Nevertheless, the chart says that 1.9% of students reported having attempted suicide in the past year. This chart shows the percentages of students that reported such feelings on each of the surveys from 2010 to 2020. The percentages who reported feeling overwhelmed and exhausted haven't changed much. The percentages who reported feeling very sad, very lonely, overwhelming anxiety, hopeless, overwhelming anger, and depressed have all increased over time, especially since 2014. However, there was no real change in the percent attempting suicide, although there has been a gradual increase in the percentage of students who reported intentionally hurting themselves or seriously considering suicide. Those feeling each of the 8 emotions in past years were much more likely to rate their overall health as fair or poor than those not feeling the emotions. This also partly explains the decline in overall perceived health. To see the connection between emotional well-being and self-harm, we have counted how many of the 8 emotional problems respondents reported having in the past year, and then what percentage of those experiencing each number of problems reported considering or acting on each of the 3 types of self-harm behaviors. This chart shows that the greater the number of these emotional problems the students experience, the greater the likelihood they will engage in or consider one of the self-harm actions. There is an especially great increase when they experience 7 or 8 of the emotional problems. Fully 41% of students reported experiencing 7 or 8 of the problems. Now, this would strongly suggest that it is important for students experiencing emotional difficulties to get help to cope with the struggles they are facing in order to prevent all self-destructive consequences. The follow-up section of the questionnaire asks respondents if they've been diagnosed or treated for 15 different mental health conditions. This bar chart shows the percentages of students who reported being diagnosed or treated for various types of emotional and mental health conditions in the past year. The overall length of each bar reflects the total percentage of students who with a particular diagnosis. The green portion of each bar indicates the portion of those diagnosed who have received treatment for the problem in the past year. The pink part represents a new diagnosis in the past year that isn't yet being treated. The prevalence of 3 of the conditions significantly increased in 2020 compared to 2018: anxiety disorders, depression, and panic attacks. Respondents were asked if they've ever received treatment or counseling for their emotional or psychological issues, and if so, by what kind of care provider, and whether or not they have received care at MSU. 40.7% reported ever receiving professional psychological or mental health services, continuing the gradual increase we've seen in previous surveys from 30.7% found in 2010. In 2020, 20.5% of respondents said they have received psychological or mental health services from MSU. That's a 100% increase from the 9.9% reported in 2010 survey. This suggests there's been both an increased capacity for counseling services at MSU to accommodate the need, as well as increased outreach to students to encourage help-seeking behavior when the need arises. Additionally, 83% of respondents claimed they would consider seeking professional help if they were having a personal problem in the future. This is a 22% increase in willingness to seek help compared to the 67% found in 2010. Now, this also suggests that students who have sought help have felt that they actually received the help that they needed, making them more comfortable to return for care if need arises again, and that they have shared this opinion with other students. That seems like a good thing as well. The NCHA questionnaire includes 2 sets of questions regarding the students' drug use. One set is about their misuse of prescription drugs, and the other is about their use of alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. And we'll look at the misuse of prescription drugs first. This section asks respondents if they had taken various kinds of prescription drugs that were not prescribed for them personally. 5 different types were listed, along with examples of each, including antidepressants, erectile dysfunction drugs, painkillers, sedatives, and stimulants. The chart shows the percentages of students who reported using each of the different types of drugs during the 6 surveys from 2010 to 2020. The figure shows little or no change in the misuse of erectile dysfunction drugs antidepressants, and sedatives, but a decreased misuse of stimulants and painkillers. The sharpest decline was regarding the misuse of painkillers. The bold black line at the top shows the percentage of students who reported having misused at least one of the types of drugs. The figure shows there has been an overall decrease in the misuse of prescription drugs at MSU, especially since 2014. Drug use is a subject about which there are a lot of beliefs about what students do that may or may not be grounded in fact. In general, people, including students themselves, believe that more students use various drugs and use them more frequently than is actually the case. People misperceive what is normal. In the other set of questions about drug use, respondents were asked to report on their actual frequency of use of each of 18 different kinds of non-prescription drugs, tobacco and alcohol. In the chart, the darker red section of the horizontal bar for each type of substance represents the percentage of students who reported using that substance one or more days in the previous month. The pink section represents the percentage that has used the substance, but just not in the past month. The white space to the right of each bar represents the percentage of students who said they have never used that substance. There is a lot of white space to the right of almost all of the substances listed, and especially so for the illegal drugs. By far, alcohol was the most commonly used of the substances listed. 73.1% reported using alcohol one or more days in the previous month. However, nearly 1 in 6 reported never having drunk alcohol, and another 11% reported not having used alcohol in the previous month. This chart shows the percentages of students who reported using each of 7 of the substances in the surveys from 2000 to 2020. Percentages of students who used alcohol in the previous month declined from 78.4% in 2000 to 70.6% in 2020, a 7% decline. Percentages of students who smoked cigarettes in the previous month declined from 29.5% in 2000 to 5.8% in 2020, an 80% decline. Now, you may recall that MSU implemented a total ban on tobacco use anywhere on campus in 2017, but you can see that the trend line for smoking cigarettes has been steadily declining since at least 2004, and its decline did not accelerate with the ban, although smoking did continue to decline. So the ban itself doesn't appear to have influenced the rate of decline. The percentage of students who smoked marijuana in the previous month increased from 15.7% in 2000 to 24.2% in 2020, a 54% increase. But most of this has been since 2016, when medical marijuana and recreational marijuana laws changed. Percentage of students who smoked cigars in the previous month declined from 8.6% in 2000 to 2.6% in 2020, a 70% decline. The percentage who said they used cocaine in the previous month did not change at all. It was 0.6% in 2000, and it was also 0.6% in 2020 as well. Vaping or smoking e-cigarettes only became an option since 2010, and the question about smoking e-cigarettes was added to the survey in 2016, when we found that only 4.2% of students had smoked e-cigarettes in the previous month. But in 2020, this had risen to 16.6%, a 140% increase, partly as a result of smokers switching from conventional cigarettes to e-cigarettes. The question was regarding the use of water pipe or hookah to smoke tobacco was also added in 2014. The percentage of students who said they had smoked a hookah in the previous month was 10.6% in 2014, but dropped to 1.6% in 2020, an 85% decline. These next few slides illustrate the use of the NCHA to evaluate the effectiveness of a health-related program. In this case, an effort out of a student health and wellness center to reduce alcohol-related harms by reducing high-risk drinking. The approach used in this effort is largely based on simply trying to correct the misperception many students have about what normal drinking really is. Slides focus more specifically on the volume and frequency of alcohol use, as well as the actual prevalence of consumption-related harm. In examining the frequency of consumption, we've broken down how many days in the month respondents reported drinking any alcohol at all. We've collapsed responses into 3 categories: those who drank not at all in the past month, those that drank only 1 or 2 days in the past month, and those that said they used alcohol 3 or more days in the past month. And then we plotted the trend for the percentages of students that fall into each of the 3 categories across the 11 surveys from 2000 to 2020. The chart shows that the percentages who reported not drinking at all in the previous month has generally increased from 21.5% in 2000 to 27% in 2020. The percentage that drank 1 or 2 days gradually increased also from 13.9% to 2000 to 19.9% in 2020. Meanwhile, the percentages of students who drank on 3 or more days in the previous month generally declined from 64.6% in 2000 to 53.1% in 2020, an 18% decline. That is, since 2000, more frequent drinking has declined while moderate drinking and abstinence has increased at MSU. The questionnaire asked respondents how many times they drank 5 or more drinks during a single occasion in the previous 2-week period. That is, how many times they had participated in high volume drinking, sometimes called binge drinking. This chart shows the average number of times respondents said they engaged in binge drinking during the prior 2-week period in each of the 11 surveys. The chart shows that there has been a general decline in the frequency of binge drinking from an average of 1.5 times in the previous 2 weeks in 2000 to less than 1 time per 2 weeks in 2020, a roughly 42% decline. Respondents were also asked how many drinks they had the last time they partied, over how many hours they drank on that occasion, their weight, and their sex. And from their answers to these questions, an estimate can be calculated for the respondents' blood alcohol concentration, or BAC, the last time they partied. We've done this calculation for each respondent and have plotted the mean BAC for each survey year since 2000. In the chart, we show the average for all students in green, for graduate and professional students in red, and for undergraduates in blue. The results are among only those who drink alcohol. The chart shows that undergrads typically had higher BACs than grads. More importantly, however, the chart shows that there has been a general decline in BAC for both undergrads and grads across the 11 surveys. The average BAC among undergrads declined from 0.092 in 2000 to 0.049 in 2020. The average BAC among grad students declined from 0.065 in 2000 to 0.026 in 2020. The blood alcohol concentration of 0.08 or higher is considered legally drunk. The chart indicates that since 2000, the average student at MSU has not been drunk when he or she parties. This chart focuses on the percentages of undergraduates and graduate students who reported consuming various numbers of drink when they partied. For both grads and undergrads, we've divided them into 3 categories: those that reported drinking 0 to 4 drinks the last time they partied, those that reported drinking 5 to 7 drinks, and those that reported drinking 8 or more drinks. We are only showing the trend lines for the percentages of grads and undergrads that reported drinking 0 to 4 and those drinking 8 or more. The blue lines are the undergrads and the red lines are the grads. The bolder lines are those drinking 8 or more drinks. The chart shows that graduate students drink less than undergraduates. That is, the larger percentages, they have larger percentages who drink 0 to 4 and smaller percentages that drink 8 or more. It also shows that the percentage of undergrads drinking 0 to 4 has gradually increased from 55% in 2000 to 65% in 2020, about an 18% increase. At the same time, there has been steady declines in the percentages of both undergrads and grads who drink 8 or more, from 31% in 2000 for undergrads to 12% in 2020, a 60% decline, and from 12% of grads in 2000 to 5% of grads in 2020, a 56% decline. Another set of questions asked students about drinking and driving. Respondents who sometimes drive and sometimes drink were asked if they had driven after drinking any alcohol in the previous month, and then if they had driven after drinking 5 or more drinks in the past month. In 2020, 18.1% of these students reported that they had driven after drinking at least once in the past month, and 0.7% reported doing so at least once after drinking 5 or more drinks. The chart shows there has been a substantial and generally steady decline in driving after drinking among MSU students since 2000. The NCHA questionnaire asked those who drink whether or not they experience any of 9 different types of harm as a result of their drinking. This chart plots trend lines for the percentages of respondents who reported experiencing each of 9 different types of adverse outcomes across the 11 surveys from 2000 to 2020. The different outcomes were: did something they later regretted, forgot where they were or what they did, got in trouble with the police, someone had sex with them without their consent, they had sex with someone else without their consent, they had unprotected sex, they physically injured themselves, or they physically injured someone else, or they seriously considered suicide. It also plots a bold black line representing the percentage of respondents who reported experiencing at least one of these 9 types of harm in the past year in each of the 11 surveys. Although it seems to fluctuate some, its overall trend is slightly downward, from 59% of drinkers experiencing some type of harm in 2000 to 51% in 2020, a 13% decline in the percent experiencing harm. Nearly all of the individual types of harm have actually declined over time. For example, injury to self. The noteworthy exception is had unprotected sex. It has actually increased since 2016. Since 2006, and this happens to coincide with roughly the end of the HIV/AIDS scare. So we have some concern about whether unprotected sex means the same thing now as it did then. Earlier, we looked at the problems respondents claimed adversely impacted their academic performance. We noted that although problems with alcohol were the 6th most common experienced problem, drinking was not among the top 10 factors adversely impacting academic performance. That is largely because the program to reduce harm from high-risk drinking seems to have greatly reduced this type of harm, as it has reduced frequency of drinking and the amount being consumed. This chart plots the percentage of students who reported that their drinking negatively impacted their academic performance in one of 3 different ways: either a lower grade on an exam or assignment, a lower grade in a course, or having to take an incomplete or drop a course. The bold black line shows the percentage negatively impacted in at least one of those ways during each year the NCHA survey was conducted. The overall trend has been downward, from 10.2% experiencing academic harm from their drinking in 2000 to 4.3% in 2020, a 57% reduction. Now we'll turn to a very different area of student health: sex. The survey includes questions on sexual orientation, participation or not in types of sexual activity, the numbers and types of sexual partners, the use of condoms during sex, the use of contraception, and unintended pregnancies. We'll briefly examine results for a couple of these. Sexual behavior is another area of health about which many people have significant misperceptions regarding what students typically do. In the first 10 years of NCHA, the questionnaire included a question that asked students to indicate how many sexual partners the typical student had during the school year. This first chart shows the percentages of MSU students who thought the typical student had 0, 1, or 2 or more partners. As you can see, in each of the 5 surveys in that decade, roughly 8 or 9 out of 10 students thought the typical student had 2 or more sexual partners in that school year. Almost no one thought the typical student had no sexual partner. The questionnaire also asked respondents how many sexual partners they personally had during the academic year, and this question has been asked every year from 2000 to the present. The second chart shows its results. As you can see, what respondents report is actually true is significantly different from what they think is true. The percentage of students who reported having no sexual partners in the year is an order of magnitude greater than what respondents think is true. And the percentage of respondents who had more than one sexual partner is a small fraction of what they think is true. While students think 8 or 9 out of 10 have multiple partners, 75% or so actually report having only one or none. It turns out most students, if they have a sexual partner at all, are in a monogamous relationship. 26% of grad students are married, and another 14% are in a relationship and living together, while another 30% are in a relationship but not living together. That is, about 70% of graduate students are in a monogamous relationship. Only 3% of undergrads are married, and 6% are in a relationship and living together, while another 36% of undergrads are in a relationship but not living together. That is, roughly 45% are in some type of monogamous relationship. And then there are the segments of both undergrads and grad students who have no sexual partners at all. So again, misperceptions oftentimes is way different than reality. A pregnancy, especially if unintended, could be very disruptive to a student's academic performance. Therefore, the question asks students that have ever had vaginal intercourse, what, if any, contraception they or their partner used the last time they had sex. 31.5% of respondents reported never having had vaginal intercourse, and of those who had, 85% said they or their partner did use some type of contraception during the last occasion. The second chart shows the percentages of these respondents who said they used various types of contraceptive methods. The most commonly mentioned form of contraception used was condoms, by 63%. The second most commonly mentioned contraceptive was pills, mentioned by 61%. The third most common method reported was withdrawal, 38%. 15% of respondents actually said that they had to use an emergency contraception in the past 12 months, but only 1% of sexually active MSU females reported an unintended pregnancy in the past school year. In another section of the questionnaire, respondents were asked to indicate their height, weight, how many days in the past week they exercised either vigorously for 20 minutes or moderately for 30 minutes. They were also asked to report how many days they did muscle strengthening exercises, how many days in the past week they got enough sleep, and how many servings of fruits and vegetables they typically eat per day. We'll go through some of the results for these next. The exercise guidelines regarding cardiovascular health represent a combination of exercise frequency, duration, and intensity. We've combined respondents' answers to the questions about moderate and vigorous exercise to determine what percentage of respondents reported a combination of these sufficient to meet the recommended level of physical activity weekly. This pie chart shows the results. Half of MSU students engaged in the recommended level of aerobic activity on a weekly basis, and half don't. There is also a guideline or recommendation regarding muscle toning or strengthening activities. Again, this involves consideration of frequency, duration, or numbers of repetitions, but also a variety of muscle groups exercised. This second pie chart shows the percentage of MSU students who meet the recommended level of this activity. 39% of respondents participate in the recommended level of muscle strengthening and toning activity per week, but almost half the students, 48%, don't do this type of exercise at all. Earlier, we saw that sleep difficulty was the third most common issue which respondents reported adversely impacted their academic performance. The questionnaire asked respondents how many days of the previous week they got enough sleep to feel rested when they got up. This pie chart indicates that only 12% of students got 6 or 7 nights of restful sleep, while more than half, 56%, reported getting restful sleep less than half the nights of the week. In this slide, we examine the trends that have been taking place since 2000 to 2020 regarding exercise, restful sleep, weight status, and fruit and vegetable consumption. We've added a vertical line for 2009 to mark the point at which the NCHA questionnaire was first revised. The questions about aerobic physical activity, the red line, and muscle toning, strengthening is the black line, were significantly altered between the first version of the NCHA questionnaire and the version 2 or NCHA 2 questionnaire. And you can see that the wording substantially changes the responses, but the results have been relatively stable since the revisions. The revision enabled a more precise measurement of the combination of moderate and vigorous aerobic activity, and that is represented by the dark green line beginning in 2010. The chart does suggest that there has been a modest increase in the percentage of students who engage in muscle toning or strengthening, the black line, in the past 5 years. It also indicates that the percentage of students who reported getting an adequate number of nights of restful sleep, the purple line, had been relatively constant until 2017, and then it has fallen, as you might expect with an increase in stress and anxiety. The line graphs also indicate the percent of MSU students who, based on BMI scores, are obese, the orange line, and it has gradually increased, while the percentage who are overweight, the blue line, has remained relatively flat. The graph also indicates there has been little change in the percentage of students who eat 5 or more servings of fruits and vegetables per day. That's the light green slide at the bottom of the chart. Several other sections of the questionnaire focus on disease prevention, health screening, injury prevention, and safety and victimization. The questionnaire asked respondents to indicate whether or not they had been vaccinated against various diseases and whether or not they had recently had preventive health screening exams, such as dental exams and cleaning, breast exams, gynecological exams, testicular exams, blood pressure checks, cholesterol checks, or sunscreens. This chart shows the percentages of respondents who reported having done each of these in the 2020 survey and the previous 5 other surveys. The dark green bar of each set of bars shows the results for 2020. The bar chart indicates that over the past decade, while there has been little change from year to year for many of the health screening activities, there have been progressively increasing percentages of students getting vaccinated for HPV, influenza, MMR, meningococcal, and varicella. In 2020, the percentage of students vaccinated for influenza had risen to 52.4%, for hepatitis B, 76.6%, for HPV, 65.1%, measles, mumps, rubella, 82.6%, meningococcal, 74%, and for varicella, 77.3%. Now, it's notable that the percent vaccinated for HPV has roughly tripled since 2010. Another section of questions asked students how much of the time they wear a seatbelt when riding in a car or wear a helmet when riding on a motorcycle, bicycle, or rollerblading. The stacked bar chart here shows the overall results for 2020 regarding each. The grade segment of each bar represents the percentage of students who said they never ride in or drive a car, a bicycle, a motorcycle, or a rollerblade. The green segments represent the percentage of students who do the activity and always, in the case of motor vehicle, or most of the time for the other 3 activities, wear the appropriate protective gear. The bar chart indicates almost all students ride in a car, and about 81% of these always wear a seatbelt. About 62% of students rode a bike, but only 18% of those who do always or most of the time wore a helmet. About 17% rode a motorcycle, and the majority of these, 58%, said they wore a helmet all or most of the time. About 18% said they rollerbladed, but only 24% of these said they wore a helmet all or more of the time. This line graph shows the trends in the use of helmets and seatbelts over the past 2 decades among students who participated in the relevant activity. The percentages of participants using a helmet while inline skating, riding a bicycle, or wearing a seatbelt in a car have all increased. The same had also been true regarding wearing a helmet while riding a motorcycle until roughly 2012. After the 2012 survey, Michigan signed a bill into law making it legal to ride a motorcycle without wearing a helmet. The change in the law has resulted in a sharply decreased use of helmets among MSU students who ride motorcycles. Respondents were asked to indicate how safe they feel on campus and in the surrounding community during the daytime and during the nighttime. The stacked bar chart on the left shows the percentages of students who said they feel very safe, dark green, somewhat safe, light green, somewhat unsafe, pink, and not safe at all, red. The chart indicates that a substantially greater number of students feel safer on campus than in the community, regardless of the time of day, but that they also feel much safer during the daytime than in the nighttime, regardless of the location. Almost none feel unsafe on campus during the daytime, while only 1 in 6 feels very safe in the community during the nighttime. The trend lines in the second chart shows how the perception of safety has changed over the past decade. While there has been little to no change over the decade in the percentage of students who feel very safe on campus during the nighttime, there has been erosion of feeling very safe during the daytime, both on campus and in the community during the nighttime. Now, one might wonder whether the actual incidence of victimization on campus and in the community have increased over this time period in a way that justifies this decreased sense of safety, or if perhaps the inception of text alerting students, faculty, and staff about current crimes or threats has simply made risk more salient and more widely known, even if the actual number of incidents hasn't increased at all. And perhaps this is a question someone else would like to explore in greater depth at some other time. But the NCHA survey does collect some information about victimization that might partially address this. Students were asked whether or not they had been personally involved in or were a victim of a variety of potentially harmful or troubling incidents during the last 12 months. Now, it may be important to note that the question asks about incidents over the previous 12 months, a significant portion of which would be time when the students would not have been at the university at all. Consequently, it isn't clear whether any of the incidents reported occurred while the student was at the university or not. Nevertheless, this bar chart shows the percentage of students who reported that they had been involved in these 10 different situations. 4% said they'd been in a fight, 3% had been physically assaulted, 18% said they'd been verbally threatened, 10% said they had been sexually touched without consent, 3% reported an attempted rape, 18% said they'd actually been raped, 4% said they'd been stalked, 8% said they'd been in an emotionally abusive relationship, 2% said they'd been in a physically abusive relationship, and 3% said they'd been in a sexually abusive relationship. Overall, 29% of students reported being involved in at least one of these. By looking at whether the trends regarding these kinds of incidents increased or decreased over the past decade, we might have a better idea if the decreased sense of safety on campus or in the community reflects an actual increase in risk. Here we plot the percentages of students who reported involvement in these various kinds of situations in each of the surveys since 2010. It indicates that while the percent who were sexually touched without consent increased, the percent who were involved in a fight decreased. While the percent involved in a sexually abusive relationship went up slightly, the percent who were physically assaulted went down by a similar amount. The other types of situations changed little. The bold black line at the top represents the percentage of respondents who reported victimization or involvement in at least one of these situations across the 6 surveys since 2010. Overall, there was actually a small decrease in the percentage of students who reported being victimized or involved. So this result suggests, at least, that the declining sense of safety may have more to do with perceptions rather than an actual increase in risk. Finally, one other section of the NCHA questionnaire focuses on the efforts of the university to provide health-related information to students. In this section, respondents were asked to indicate whether or not they had ever received information from MSU on each of a variety of health topics. It also asked if they are interested in now receiving information on these topics. The bar chart on the left shows the percentages of all respondents who claim to have received information from MSU on each topic. We've organized these in descending order of percentages who reported receiving information. At the top, 96% reported receiving information about sexual assault and relationship violence. 85% reported receiving information regarding alcohol and other drug use. 74% said they received information on depression or anxiety. 68% reported receiving information on relationship difficulties, and 64% reported receiving information on colds, flus, and sore throats. At the bottom, less than 40% reported receiving information about grief and loss, sleep difficulties, injury and violence prevention, eating disorders, or problem use of internet and computer games. Only 4% reported not receiving information from the university about any of these. Respondents were also asked to indicate if they now would be interested in receiving information on each of these topics from the university. The second bar chart shows the percentages of respondents who indicated they would be interested in receiving information from the university on specific topics. Now, if you think like me, you'd probably suspect that students would be more interested in getting information on topics which they have concerns or are currently struggling with. The top 5 topics respondents said they would like to get information, as you might guess, were stress reduction, mentioned by 74% of students, how to help others in distress, mentioned by 68%, depression and anxiety, 67%, nutrition, 66%, sleep difficulties, 64%, and physical activity, 62%. In this presentation, we've covered the overall results of a large portion of the 2020 NCHA survey and how those results compare to those from earlier years to see what trends in student health have been taking place. We have particularly noted areas of student health that appear to be increasingly problematic for students, especially in relation to their academic performance. Emotional and mental health issues seem particularly noteworthy in this regard. Because all of these data were collected before the onset of the COVID pandemic, the health-related perceptions, behaviors, and conditions we found that have worsened or improved are not because of COVID. However, it also seems most likely that the events of 2020, the pandemic, the economic impact of COVID, the issues of racial justice that have been raised, the political turmoil, will have exacerbated some of the stress and anxiety-related problems the students beyond what we've seen in these data. We've also noted the effectiveness of some efforts to improve student health, such as reducing high-risk drinking, banning tobacco on campus, increasing vaccinations or counseling services available. But we've also noted areas in which external factors such as changes in laws, such as marijuana legalization or helmet use on motorcycles, or novel technologies like vaping or e-cigarettes, and possibly crime alerts have undermined some aspects of the campus climate. For lack of time, there remains a number of blocks of questions for which the results are not included in this presentation. Furthermore, we have not covered detailed comparisons of the various results across segments of the student body, such as comparisons between males and females, by race, ethnicity, by academic class, by on-campus versus off-campus residents, between Greeks and non-Greek students, between undergraduates and graduate professional students. Many of these additional analyses are in fact already completed and are accessible in the full report of the survey that can be found at the link shown on the screen. In the late 90s and early 2000s, the American College Health Association chose 54 markers as indicators of overall health of the student bodies at colleges and universities. It set goals for each to help guide universities toward improving the overall health of their campuses. The NCHA questionnaire was designed in part to measure the current status of each campus on 50 of the 54 healthy campus indicators. Every 10 years, ACHA updates these goals for improving the health of each campus. For the past decade, MSU has been working to meet the Healthy Campus 2020 goals. In the appendix to the full survey report available at the link you see on the screen, there is a table that lists all 54 of the Healthy Campus goals for 2020, along with MSU's results that indicate which of the goals MSU was able to meet and which not. I would encourage you to access the full report if you are interested. We hope this overview and the more detailed report informs, dispels stereotypes and myths, and stimulates other questions that might be explored or thoughts about programs or policies that very well might lead to improvements in the academic and social climate at MSU. We hope such efforts help enable each student to maximize the value of their time spent at the university. If it accomplishes any of these things, we will have done your job. So I'd like to thank you for joining us for the presentation of the results. And I think Andrew may have a couple of comments now, or Dennis, and then we can open this up to further questions.